Conditions May Apply by CinnamonPinecones. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 187. Everybody's worried about Izuku. Something had shifted in Izuku when they took him to see Yagi. Shota watched his spine stiffen and his jaw set once he felt the man's pulse, as if he had to prove to himself that Yagi was alive with his own hands. It sickened him to remember the times he had watched the kid do that to a corpse while they were patrolling. But he shook the thought from his mind. A little more focus had bled into his gaze when he caught Shota's eyes and nodded for him to take him back to his room. His better judgment told him he should let the kid sit here for a minute, just to get him to catch his breath. But it had already been enough of a struggle to get the guards to let them in. It was probably better for him to leave of his own volition rather than wait for Muscle to haul them out. Zashi was waiting for them in the hall anyway, so he acquiesced. "That was fast," Hizashi murmured when they exited the room. "He just wanted proof," Shota replied with a shrug. Izuku was staring blankly ahead again. He didn't seem to be aware that they were talking at all, much less about him. "He okay?" Zashi asked, observing the blank stare on Izuku's face. "As much as he was before. He didn't say anything, just checked his pulse and nodded at me to leave once he felt it. He was looking around on the way here. He's gone all space cadet on us again." "I think he's out of energy. Used the last of it to make sure All Might was alive, and now he's..." He trailed off, gesturing to the kid. "Spent?" Izashi finished his thought. "Yeah," he agreed. They walked in silence back to Izuku's room and flagged the nurse down to get him settled back in bed. Izuku hardly acknowledged anything the entire time, only getting up on shaking legs to collapse on the bed after Shota pushed him gently. "Can we get that cello? I think he might be out of it enough to eat on autopilot," he asked before the nurse left. "Yeah, of course. I've got orange, lime, and strawberry," she answered. "Strawberry," he replied. He peeled the foil off the top of the container, and Hizashi put a spoon in the kid's hand. All three of them let out a sigh of relief when the kid started slowly feeding himself. He ate a little over half of it before he stopped, his hand falling limply to the sheets. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Clearly, sleep was more important at the moment. "Lay back, kid. You need to rest." Shota spoke up when his eyelids refused to heed gravity like his arms had. As expected, Izuku didn't respond, but he followed Hizashi's hand obediently as it gently pressed him back into the pillows. It wasn't even 5 minutes before his breaths became slow and heavy with sleep. They let the silence hang between them and watched the steady rise and fall of his chest. He didn't seem to have any more injuries than he had when he was taken, at least nothing substantial. The lack of physical evidence gave no clue as to what he had gone through, and it was killing Shota not to know. He's sure hearing what happened would only make him sick to his stomach, but all the what-ifs and maybes were running rampant in his mind. Izuku didn't need any more trauma on top of the shit show that his life had been already. He deserved to feel safe and protected. He deserved to heal, to act like a kid for once in his life. After what had happened, he would be surprised if Izuku ever felt safe again. For the 1,000th time since they took him in, Shota wondered if it had been a terrible mistake. He had proven several times over that he couldn't even protect the kid from bodily harm, much less help him heal from a life's worth of horrific trauma. "Sho?" Hizashi's voice pulled him out of his spiraling. He looked up at them, but didn't respond. "You're going all space cadet on me now, too," they pointed out. He had nothing to say to that, so he just lowered his gaze again, tentatively taking Izuku's hand back in his own gently enough not to wake him. It was warm and small, calloused beyond its years. "He's gonna be okay. We're all gonna be okay. We got him back," Hizashi asserted. He felt his lips tighten into a frown, but he forced himself to reply. Yeah. He pushed the word out, breathy, unsteady, and entirely unconvincing. Izuku's shaky awareness came back to him when he blinked open his eyes in a familiar, staticky liminal space. He was tempted to just close his eyes again and pretend none of this was happening because he was so damn tired. But he had a responsibility to figure out what the hell was going on, so he took a deep breath and looked up to the figure standing in front of him. It was the same woman from before. Were they in his head? Could they hear what he was thinking? Because if they could, he probably owed them an apology for everything he thought at them. However, they did help hijack his body, so he wasn't too keen on taking back any of his overly harsh sentiments. Hello, Ninth, she greeted him. He was still enveloped in a strange mist and didn't really have control over his body here. So he just looked at her and nodded back in greeting. I don't think we got off on the right foot earlier. My name is Nana Shimura. I was the seventh wielder of One for All, she explained. All right. He had ghosts in his brain. Terrific. That, or he had just gone completely off the deep end. Both options seemed equally plausible at this point. You've given us all quite a few scares. I think you're more a trouble magnet than Toshi was. I didn't know that was possible, she continued, unperturbed by his lack of response. Only two of the other figures were here with her, the bald one and the man with the facial markings. You have been far more receptive to my influence than any other user. I have tried to impart danger sense to all of the other wielders preceding me, but you're the only one to have taken it. I am Hikage Shinomori, the fourth wielder of One for All. The latter man introduced himself. Izuku half nodded in greeting before stopping mid-motion when the man's words caught up to him. Was he talking about his quirk? Was that what the premonitions were? Was he using someone else's quirk? Of course he was using someone else's quirk. That wasn't exactly a new concept at this point. Does that mean... Daigoro Banjo. I'm the fifth. My quirk's called Black Whip. The bald man introduced himself next. Okay, then. Black Whip. That was probably those horrible static tentacle things that nearly ripped his limbs from their sockets. Those had the potential to be very helpful, actually, like Eraser's capture weapon, once they stopped attempting to draw and quarter him, of course. Wait, how the hell was he supposed to explain this to his classmates? We're sure you have a lot of questions. This would be a hell of a lot easier if you could talk. Fourth and fifth spoke at the same time. Well, it seemed that they couldn't read his mind, so that answered one question. Izuku put his hands up and gestured helplessly as if to say, yeah, no shit, but halted the motion when he realized he could actually make a gesture. Please, tell me you guys were paying attention to Mike teaching me JSL, he signed excitedly. All three of them looked at each other with expressions that told him they had not, in fact, been paying attention to Mike's lessons. His expression dropped, but at least that meant they probably weren't watching him 24/7, because that was an uncomfortable thought. Wasn't Sixth doing that shit? Banjo asked the other two, making nonsense gestures as he did. I believe he was trying to follow along, but Ninth isn't exactly following a proper curriculum. I don't know how much he's managed to pick up, but it's better than nothing. I will go find him. Shinomori responded before fading away. Okay, well, that's all besides the point. The reason we're trying to talk to you is that you cannot go through with your plans to meet with Dobby. There's no telling what could happen. It is far too much of a risk with little to no promise of reward. You need to tell your guardians about it and let them handle it. Nana took the reins of the conversation back. Izuku just stared at her blankly. The only bit of sign language he could use in response to that was too disrespectful for his taste, so he kept it to himself. Ninth, he is criminally insane, please. You just got free of their clutches. What if he just uses the opportunity to get you back? All for One knows who you are now. We can't risk. Haven't exactly been following as much as Ninth seems to, but I can try. Ah, hello, Ninth, a younger man greeted, interrupting Nana's warnings. I'm the sixth wielder, Taya In. It's nice to properly meet you. Izuku waved a polite greeting before glancing awkwardly back at Nana. I interrupted, didn't I? En cringed slightly. It's all right. I was just telling Ninth that it's incredibly foolish to pursue his plans to meet with Dobby, she explained. Izuku signed back a reply slowly. I think he said, I'll be fine, En translated. Izuku gave him a thumbs up, and Nana's shoulders slumped in defeat. I told you it was pointless. Have you been paying attention to this kid at all? He picks the most batshit option every time, Banjo asserted. Izuku signed again. He said, thanks, but he meant it sarcastically, I think, and spoke up. Yes, sixth. We gathered that last bit. Banjo answered with a half-amused smirk. Ninth, please. This is not an acceptable risk to take. You saw what happened this time. We can't let it happen again. Nana pleaded her case one last time. These people didn't understand risk assessment. He's been living and breathing risk assessment since he was 4 years old. They didn't understand him, and they didn't understand Dobby. They were putting One for All above all else, above actual human lives, the lives of his classmates, and that wasn't something Izuku could abide by. They'd gone against his autonomy once, and he wasn't going to let it happen again. He felt anger flare up in his gut, but he squashed it down. Now wasn't the time. I'm not arguing with you on this. I know what I'm doing, he signed and let En translate the gist of it to the others. The figures were starting to get fuzzy again. He assumed that meant his time was running out. We don't have time for yapping. We can only stay here so long. Listen, Ninth, One for All is evolving. You're going to have 4 more quirks coming your way. Black Whip responded to your desperation to get your classmate back, but that ain't reliable. Get a handle on your heart, and you'll get a handle on Black Whip. The rest will come when you're ready. We're with you, kid. Train like a madman. Banjo pivoted the conversation back. Wait, what are everyone's quirks? What are the other 3? How did I get here? What if I have more questions? He signed rapidly as the figures faded. En didn't seem to catch any of it and gave a sheepish and apologetic wave goodbye as the group faded from view. Nana's voice was the last thing he heard before it all faded away into the blackness of sleep. Please, Izuku, listen to me. Katsuki was more than a little pissed that the hospital was having him stay the night. He didn't need to be here. All that was wrong was a little dehydration and a couple busted stitches. He knew how to drink water. He didn't need a damn IV drip. The only reason he wasn't shouting about it is that the old man looked like he was about to shit himself every time he so much as adjusted how he was lying down. The silence was killing him more than the stillness. Quit freaking out. I can hear you sweating from here, he snapped. Don't yell at your father, brat. The hag shot back immediately. I'm fine. He's acting like I'm on death's door. I was just worried, son. His dad answered calmly. Well, cut it out. He bit back, only slightly more reserved than before. Silence fell back over the room, and it made him want to pull his hair out. Is Izuku all right? His dad asked. That was even worse than the silence. He's fine. Busted some bones. He'll live. He gave a clipped answer. Have you tried reaching out to Inko? His dad asked the hag. Oh, her number changed years ago. I don't know what the hell her problem is, she scoffed. Maybe we should try reaching out again, his dad suggested. I did my dues. If she wants to move places and get a new number just to get rid of me, that's her choice. She snapped at the notion. They moved? It couldn't have been far if Izuku was still at Aldera. I don't know. I wasn't going to hunt her down, she growled back. Did they really move? Maybe Deku was in Uptown now. What the hell happened that was so catastrophic that Auntie had to go to such lengths to avoid the hag, though? It probably had something to do with the damn deadbeat. He probably drained all their money and forced them into the slums. What the hell happened to them in the last few years? What the hell happened to Deku to make him act like that? The thought made Katsuki sick. So he closed his eyes and tried to drown out his parents' yapping. After sleeping in that damn chair, the hospital bed felt like a cloud under him. And with the distant noises of conversation, it was easier to drift off than it had any right to be. Recovery Girl had been called in to help with the influx of patients at Camino General, so Izuku woke up to a quirk-powered kiss and promptly fell back asleep. He caught a stray moment or two of wakefulness during the discharge process, but he didn't fully get his wits about him until they were well over halfway home, if he was reading the road signs correctly. Mike and Eraser were fretting over him since the moment he woke up in the hospital. They were worried about him and were doing a poor job of concealing it. Mike's eyes kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror, to the point where Izuku was concerned about how often his focus was leaving the road in front of them. However, his head was swimming with a million different thoughts, so he just ignored them. He had 9 more days before he was due to meet with Dabi, and he was going to have to get his wits about him enough to get through giving a statement to Suka without raising any red flags. He was going to need to balance acting okay enough to keep Mike and Eraser off his back, as well as acting not okay enough to get Suka not to press for answers he couldn't afford to give. All the while being okay enough to make plans and contingency plans every step of the way. Or this was all going to blow up in his face. Easy. He thought about All Might's fragile pulse thrumming under his fingertips and bit the inside of his cheek. He was so screwed. It had been 24 hours since Satoshi had betrayed the 2 people he cared about most. And he had hardly been able to keep anything besides plain miso down long enough to actually digest it. He told his mom it was because of the lingering migraine, but he had a feeling she knew he was lying. There was no hiding his guilt from her, but he did his best to try because she didn't deserve to feel it too. Izuku hadn't texted him, but he had no clue if his phone had even survived the ordeal, so he tried to delude himself into thinking that was why. Speculations of All Might's death were all over the news, and every time he saw a headline, his stomach roiled. You freaking bastard! It was supposed to be me! Izuku's words echoed through his mind on repeat, over and over and over again. What did he mean it was supposed to be him? He was supposed to be the one to fight All Might's secret arch nemesis? That certainly didn't make any sense. Did he mean he was the one they were supposed to leave behind? The one that was supposed to die? Hitoshi hadn't stopped worrying about Izuku's suicidal tendencies since he had told him why he'd left, and Hitoshi had realized what that meant. He should probably talk to Aizawa about that, even if he didn't have the right to butt back into Izuku's life. He wondered if Izuku would ever talk to him again. Hitoshi wouldn't blame him if he didn't. He wouldn't blame anyone after they heard about what he did. Toshi. His mother's voice startled him. He hadn't even heard her open the door. He just hummed in acknowledgement. I think we need to talk, she said as she pulled up his desk chair to sit beside his bed. I'm sorry. The words fell out of his mouth without his say-so. He looked down at his lap and realized his computer screen had gone to sleep. How long had he been sitting here looking at the black screen? I know, She cut herself off and took a moment to gather her thoughts before starting again. What you did wasn't okay, but I'm not upset with you for the reasons you think I am. I know you didn't want to use your quirk like that. I'm upset because you put yourself in danger, not because you used your quirk to do it. He watched the blank screen in front of him distort into a dark blur as tears welled in his eyes. He wiped them away angrily. He didn't deserve the relief those words had given him. Izuku wasn't going to forgive him so easily, and she shouldn't either. You broke my trust, but that doesn't mean it's gone. It's gonna be all right, sweetheart, she insisted as she stood up and pulled his head against her chest. He bit his lip in a futile attempt to stop the tears spilling from his eyes. It's going to be all right, she repeated. As the days passed, things started to settle down. Shota felt like the ground wasn't about to give way beneath him quite as often. Nedzu had been talking about implementing a dorm system, and they still hadn't gotten any updates on Yagi's condition. The news was in a complete frenzy over it, but they were safe from it all in the privacy of their apartment. Both he and Hizashi were still sleeping like crap, but it seemed like Izuku was doing even worse than they were in that regard. Anytime either of them ventured out at night, they could see his light on under the door. Whenever they knocked, he'd be sitting at his desk writing frantically in his notebooks with several different tabs open on his computer showing heroes that neither of them had even heard of. He was coping in his own way, they supposed. Shota knew about his affinity for analysis, and so long as those notebooks stayed secure, they weren't doing any harm. He'd gotten a look at the statement Tsukashi had taken and was glad that nothing too traumatic seemed to have happened at the bar. Obviously, being kidnapped in and of itself wasn't great, but at least they weren't tortured. At least whatever had happened to Ragdoll hadn't happened to them. Days passed, and things started to fall back into the rhythm. Sometimes Shota would go to the kitchen for a drink of water at night, and Izuku's light would be off. Sometimes Izuku would join him at the breakfast table with bags under his eyes and look a little too distant. But they took the days as they came. He wasn't talking to Shinso, but he was talking to them, and he'd agreed to an appointment with his therapist next week. Things weren't great, but they were getting there. Slowly. End of chapter.